really important foundational tools when it comes to brand strategy. And we're going to define what that looks like. We're going to also tell you a little bit about how you might choose to evaluate your position and where you are. But where we're going to be focusing specifically today is around customer attraction. And how a well-crafted brand position can really focus in on how is it that you most easily attract customers through your pipeline. So all that said, before we get rolling, I do want to go ahead and just place into the chat here. This is going to be the links that we're going to be working on today. The first one is a link to the workbook that we talked about. This workbook is around that will be something that you could print out and use with someone else to walk you through even doing this on your own if you'd like to, whether it be you do internally or you might even choose to use with other clients. It is up to you. This is a free resource for you. I'm just excited to have been able to put it together. The next link is going to be the tool that we're going to be doing today, which is Position Curve, which we'll dive deeper into. And I will hint to another tool that we created over the past couple of weeks called Position Graph. And that allows for you to ask the question, is it the right time for me to reposition or not? So before we go any further, I want to tell you just a little bit about me. Well, first, once you get these slides, you'll also see this. You'll get your links and resources. But my name's Trey Bowden. I'm principal and founder of Roar. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 3 awesome dudes. I am a preacher. So before I was in the creative industry, I thought that I was going to be in the church, and ended up going into the creative side of church. Was there for about 5 years, and then had another job transition, which I'll talk about in a second. And now I get to operate this awesome brand agency called Roar, which is about taking brands in courageous directions by providing brand leadership in moments where you can capture, where you're best positioned to capture demand in your market. So that said, I'm also a musician. So I got my guitars back here. I have quite a few guitars. I love to play and sing. But I'd love if you guys would just, love to know a little bit more about you and what job and role you're in.
Who gets to go first? I'll go first. So Brett Turner, CEO of K-Line Creative, and then also lead our sort of design strategy and creative efforts as well.
Right on.
Well, I'm Austin Grigg. I'm the COO of K-Line Creative and kind of over our technical team and kind of operations day to day.
And I'm Cooper Fiskus Van Rossum, self-employed and in creative as well, Stranded Panda Designs, and part-time esports coach, and run a nonprofit that works in the education space, helping fund underfunded programs.
Right on. Well, thanks, y'all. So when I think about positioning, I can't not think about my last job. So my last job, I was the chief brand officer of a school, which most people are like, why in the world does a school need that? And the private school market is a very, very competitive market, particularly here in Atlanta. If you don't know much about the market, there are a collection of schools that have been around since like pre-1900. And the school that I was a part of was just a sleepy day school. They were unknown 10 years ago. And because they just were kind of this nestled little pre-K through 12 school. They just launched a high school, and they really couldn't compete with these bigger schools that were around them. And they were positioned geographically where their pool, that's who they were competing with when it comes to students, to try and bring these students in here. So most of the time, if you talk to anybody who's in private school and private school marketing, communication directors or whatnot, what they would tell you is, at the end of the day, what is it that you're positioning? You're positioning an education institution for people looking for non-public options. And part of that reason is because they're actually looking for a better experience. So whether that be small classroom sizes or more opportunity for their their student to go post college. They almost look at private school as an investment. Now the thing is that when you have these really strong brands that are inside of that market, it's hard to break into because they have this long lasting history of having alumni, having endowments, having all these things that bring authority to their school. So to break into a top 10 market tier, it's just very difficult. So some schools have tried to do it, and it's been a real slow growth. But over 10 years, the school that I was a part of actually had the opportunity to try and actually get into that market, and they achieved it. But the reason why they achieved it is pretty unusual and atypical. The reason why they achieved it is they actually, rather than positioning themselves as we are a school for people looking for a better experience in public school or higher ed opportunities or options like and to create more opportunity for your child, they took a whole nother route. They said that we want to be a destination school for anyone looking to design a better world. Now, what's interesting is they took their who they are, their market, the who they are actually designing for or positioning themselves to be. What they did is they actually positioned themselves in a way that not just encompassed the student, but encompassed the community, the teacher, the administrators, and all that would be a part of that community. And it's around designing a better world, appealing to this idea that maybe just having a lot of opportunity after school isn't necessarily fulfilling all of the need or a particular subsection of the market's need. Also, they wanted to be a destination school. They realized that at the end of the day, they want to be a place that is known not just within their market, but also throughout the nation. And so Mount Vernon actually did this, and they did it by creating a new market, by not going after a traditional private school market, which is oftentimes private schools in these markets end up, you go to where your parents went or your grandparents went. And it's almost this lineage around choosing a private school. For them, what they said is, what if we went after first time private school parents who actually went to public school? They have the experience, they grew up in public school, and now they're in these jobs, particularly creative and entrepreneurial jobs, where they're like, oh my gosh, what is it that how is it that we are even able to because of being in this private school, they're unsure. Are they going to be even be able to serve? Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Hang on a second. Hey, how are you? Welcome. So basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to think through for creative and entrepreneurs, how is it that they can provide a different option for them? And so they did that. They created a school that was really based on innovation, untested waters, being iterative, in all sorts of ways that they still guaranteed this idea of you're going to have a great education. But one of their phrases was, every kid has a Harvard. It just doesn't necessarily happen to be in Massachusetts. We want to find the school that's perfect for them. And that was really powerful positioning, and it allowed for them to break into this long-lasting market. So that's kind of a little bit about my own personal story about positioning, but let's really get down to defining what brand positioning is. Brand positioning is a statement that pairs your business offerings in the marketplace with a focused definition of your ideal customer. It's simple, detailed summary of your position, right? It's becomes this bedrock. It becomes this foundation for you to actually deploy all of your strategy for marketing and messaging. And it becomes this North Star of being able to be like, what are we trying to do and who are we trying to do it for? Now, oftentimes you can express messaging positioning through extensive positioning statements. But what I want to do is give you guys about 3 minutes on your own here. In a sentence, what I want you to do is craft a simplified position statement. What do you do and who do you do it for? So get out a piece of paper or one of your notes or whatever, but I want you to just create a really simple sentence. And if you're willing, you can either share that sentence in the chat, or we can share that out loud as well. So I'll give you 3 minutes. Go for it. All right. So we're finished up here. Does anyone want to share their brand statement for us?
Sure. And then I'm very curious because Austin and Brett are both at Kalon, so I'm curious to hear which one of you is correct.
Exactly. I'm curious too.
Neither.
So at Phoenix Gaming, it's our nonprofit. We provide micro grants around $500 to scholastic esports programs to supplement their own programs if they don't receive any financial support or very limited support from their school or administrations.
Very cool. That's awesome. That's a pretty cool esports foundation. That's pretty cool.
Thanks. Pretty new. We started last summer.
All right, Austin or Brett.
Go for it, Austin. We said that something very similar, but his is better. So I'm gonna let Brett go.
No, I don't. Mine's just longer. We help automate and redesign organizational processes for small to medium-sized businesses by building custom technology solutions, allowing them to scale beyond their current capacity.
Got it. And Austin, yours was?
Kalon, we help businesses improve their business processes by designing and building custom software solutions.
Yeah, it is interesting. So why do you guys? So Ukabong, I don't know if you're able to participate. If not, you can just listen in. You can flash your mic just to let us know you're there, or if you wanted to jump in, I'll wait just a second here. Right on. Cool. Well, we'll keep moving. If you want to join us, just go on ahead and hop on. Brett and Austin, what do you see that's a difference between your two positioning statements there?
I think Austin's is more succinct and to the point. I think it gets the same point across without any potential confusion.
Right on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Brett's had a little bit of a why, or maybe a little bit of a nuance at the end for allowing them to scale beyond their current capacity. So I think that could be beneficial as far as giving some, it gives a little bit of insight right into what makes us different than somebody else. A lot of people maybe help automate processes. Yeah, I think that's one difference could be beneficial.
Yeah. So when it comes to positioning statements, what's interesting is that typically when I go through a repositioning exercise or even just a position honing exercise, is we go through this process of simplified positioning, which is much more like what Austin you put out there. It's very clear what do you do and who do you do it for, right? Well, actually, I don't even know. And to be honest, in yours, you don't even have this clarification of who you do it for, right? It's businesses, right? But what I think is interesting about Brett's is there's a really clear moment of time that you can express very clearly what their kind of plight is to scale beyond the current capacity. I think that's and there's also some emotional language in that, right? It's less technical, but it's still pretty long. So when I think about simplified positioning, my goal is to try and communicate what you do, who do you do it for, as comprehensively as possible, and also as succinct as possible, which sometimes feels like a little bit of an oxymoron. All right, well, let's continue. So you can talk about positioning when you think about brand positioning. There's all these different ways to do it. This is the position graph tool, which is in the link provided here for you. This tool can guide you through when is it the right time to position by evaluating these different components of competition, pipeline, disruption, emotion, perception, image, relevance, attraction, uniqueness. All of these reasons could be a reason why you might need to ask some questions about, is it time to reposition or not? So these are a list of those questions that come with the position graph that you can check out. But we're going to be focusing specifically on this one this one question, which is around attraction, which is the second to last question. Do you find your ideal customer profiles attracting slow to convert buyers? So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And that is what this tool position curve, which we are going to be using today, is going to evaluate. So Ukabong, thank you so much. I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly. Please forgive me in that. Your positioning said, I access business environments and help come up with optimal ways to enhance their productivity and profit margins. Great. Awesome. So someone who is in need of that can find themselves in that market. But let's go ahead and start evaluating our own position curve, which I'll explain here in a second, around the customers that you have. Because when you think about brand positioning, you have on one side is all the services that you have. So your value proposition, thinking through like really descriptive, like, are you actually communicating what you do effectively? But then on the other side of the equation, you've got customers. Do you know when? Do you know what they're dealing with, what problems they have, what need they might have, right? So all of us work in environments, at least everyone in this webinar right now, we all work in environments where like we work directly with clients. Now, I distinguish between the words customer and client. Customers, I think, more of a B2C type of relationship. It's a direct customer that you might be working with. B2B is more like I use the word client for, because it's working mostly for that entity itself. So all of us in this room have clients. We have people that we're working for. And one of the questions that we have to wrestle through is, are the clients that we have on position or off position? So what we're going to do, and I'm going to challenge you to go through here in a few minutes, is to think through your last 12 months and think through, inside of each of these categories, how many clients do I have that fall inside of each of these 4 categories? There's 2 categories which we would categorize as off position and 2 categories that are on position. The first category is this: off position, distraction. I don't know about you, but I'm an early business owner. I've just started owning my own business. And even 3 months in, I have gotten to a point of realizing there are just some clients that I hired early on that can sometimes be a distraction now as my business scales. Maybe it's because you brought them on early and you had a solution that you were providing, but you no longer provide that solution anymore. Or it could be that you have a client that it requires resources that you no longer fully deploy, and if there's significant resources that actually cause more work for you to maintain that client relationship. And it could be because, like, you really feel like that you've got and with these clients, you feel like you've got, like, they were some of your first clients. I was actually talking to one of my first clients a couple of weeks ago, and he says, here's the thing. When we first started, our first clients became some of our worst clients because they expected a certain level of service or different types of services that we can't provide anymore because we've scaled past it. So in that, engagement with that client is oftentimes not efficient. It generates little to no revenue, and sometimes they're actually costly. Now, sometimes we keep these distractions because we just enjoy the relationship, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, in business, relationships are a thing. But when we choose to continue to have this type of opposition customer, it can sometimes cause our position to be a little wonky inside of how we find other customers, because word of mouth is still a thing. So when you have a bunch of clients inside of this particular part of the position curve, it can sometimes really pull you off focus and make it difficult for you to express what you actually do. So in this, if we're going to classify clients that you have over the past 12 months, these are clients that are off position because you're providing a service that's not in your wheelhouse. And as a result, the customer is not the right segment for your business. All right. The next one is around the perfect fit. So this is that qualified, ideal client. They fit your services right now. They see the value in it, little to no effort to maintain, they come through your pipeline. They know exactly what they're looking for. You've met their need. The engagement is, sorry, it is efficient. I'll have to change that. It's completely efficient. It maybe minor hiccups because every project has it. And it generates the revenue that's intended. Sorry about that, y'all. I'll switch those slides out in a bit. But they're on position because there is nothing that you need to shift in your offerings to reach the clients. They need you, and you are positioned at the right time and place to be there. It's ideal. It's exactly the clients that you're looking for. The next position, the next segmentation of your clients could be in this experimental side of a position of an on position type of segmentation. So this one, you qualify as being the ideal client. However, you're offering a new service or product to them. So as business owners, what we know is as we grow, we start to discover more about how unique our team is, our offerings that we can provide. And we're going to offer a service that maybe be a little bit of a stretch for us, but it could open up into new services that can create and dramatically change our revenue. Oftentimes, these clients might require some process or product in-house development, right? So I'm sure that this is something that Kalon has walked through in the past, because these types of clients, they're on position because they are experimenting with new offerings among your clients. We get asked all the time. We had a proposal call this morning about what our services are, and sometimes in those moments you're like, man, actually I think we really could do that. And we as business owners have a choice to say, okay, we're going to step in. It's a little bit of an experiment. It's a little bit of a risk, but we could capture demand if we lean into this position. Okay. The last one is an off position, which is a new market. Customer clients who are from completely new market segments. This is like beyond experimentation. You're taking the largest risk because at the end of the day, the people in this market have no idea that your service exists and no idea who you are, but they're a brand new market that you feel like that they're a potential. And it could result from experimental offerings. You know, it could be that one of the experiments that you went through, you're like, wow, actually, I can see how this could serve a completely different other marketplace or different client profile. Maybe what would happen if we would lean into that? And it requires a completely new customer profile, though, because at that point, you're no longer talking to the person who has the potential needs that they have, that your typical services provide a solution to. Now you're having to speak in a different language. It could be actually your messaging has to shift and change, and because of that, it is off position. Now it's not a bad thing, right? It opens up and generates revenue, but at the same time, it requires an allocation of resources, right? You got to drum up new business. You've got to really reformat possibly your service to really fit that industry. So these clients are off position because the market they come from are unaware that you have an offering that can meet their need. They have no idea. And your goal here is to attract them or more of them because you've had at least one or two clients that have really reciprocated in that. So that is your task, is to think through over the past 12 months to total up how many clients have you had that were in the distraction, how many clients were in the perfect fit, how many clients were in experimental, and how many clients were in new markets. So I'm going to give you another 3 minutes here to just kind of jot this down. And you may need to crack open your CRM and take a look, or you can even do a little bit of back of an envelope, but take some time, kind of calculate what this would be. All right, here 3 minutes, go for it. All right. So now your job is to graph your results. So in the links I have provided for you a link to print a position curve, but obviously you may not be able to do that right now. But that's what's great about these little graphic organizers. It's just one line and 3 lines going up and down. So if you want to get out a quick piece of paper, if you have something or a note, the goal here is to not to be precise. It's okay. You don't have to draw to scale. So everybody who might be a little bit more type A, that's fine. Like you don't have to draw perfectly to scale. What we're really trying to do is to create a visual to spark a discussion. So when it comes to off position, you would just basically say, okay, I have about 5 here, and on position, I have about 10 here, and then on a new market, maybe 1. So for me, if I drew out my position curve, I'm going to do it real quick for you. It looks something like that, right? Where off position, I have a few off position here. Over here, I've got on position, and then I've got maybe some one experimental, and then nothing in new markets. So take a second to kind of draw that out. And if you've got yours drawn out, does anyone want to share kind of where you can describe it, or you can even show us your with your camera what your curve looks like? Anyone want to go for it?
I won't show mine because basically you could hold yours up again and it looks almost identical to that. I think
Okay.
so. Very, very similar. I'd say it's like 20% ish, maybe 15% distraction, majority, 70-ish percent, 65, 70 in perfect fit, a couple, and maybe another 15 in experimental, and then like maybe 5 to 10 in new.
Gotcha. Would you have agreed with that, Austin?
Yeah, for the most part, I think the only one I couldn't think specifically of a new market. There were a couple in the experimental camp that came up, so that might be a good discussion point for us afterwards, kind of where we landed on some of those. But yeah, I'd agree.
Great. And Ukambong, if you want to put into chat, you can kind of tell us kind of like, the majority in here, a little bit in here. If you wanted to do that, you're welcome to participate in that sort of way. Cooper, would you like to share anything?
Yeah, so I thought about this in the world of donors for the nonprofit, like reaching out to people to donate. We had really good success in like small donations from a big group of coaches like that believe in the community, but we got the same, we can get the same amount from a single company that gave a lump. And so it kind of shifts the graphs because the perfect position fit is the small donor, but there were a couple experimental and even like new markets just thinking like, oh, I didn't even really think about reaching out to that segment that kind of give the same amount in a one lump sum versus 20, 30 something individuals. So it makes it interesting to think about like they're not in the world that we're in, but they are still able to participate in funding. And it's usually a bigger bang for the buck, even though they're completely unrelated to the business.
Gotcha.
So it's kind of all over the place, depending on who I focus on. It's either like the nice little on position, or it's actually like if you do it by revenue, it's like, oh, it turns out we got quite a bit from experimental, and that's interesting. Maybe it's not experimental after all. Like,
I was kind of curious with that. Is that potentially an indicator of potentially a shift in your ideal customer?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shift in like one time versus overtime. So like small incremental donors will give more over time. One lump sum company that's just like, hey, yeah, we'll help you out. You might get like one nice chunk, but sometimes it's easier to get that one person on board who can write a bigger check than it is to get a bunch of individual donations. So it just ends up like, yeah, it's just, I don't know. It'll be interesting to figure out like what to do that to appease the smaller donors consistently, but then also, you still have to get some, you can't rely on $5 and $10 donations.
Right. Yeah. So after you have your curve, these are the two. So Austin and Brett, this is good that you guys are in the same company because this is a good conversation point that end up with happening is the initial questions that I would suggest any brand to think about is, first, is this an ideal curve for present day business? Right. So I think Cooper, you were even mentioning this, is like possibly like your curve is like, hey, that's actually interesting because I think I might want the curve to look different in 18 months from now. Right. But, or maybe even I go back and look at it, it's like, I was not expecting it to look like that. Right. Which is kind of what you're talking about. But the two questions that I tell people initially to start with is it an ideal curve for your present day business? But then, should the curve change? Because this is a question, because repositioning is a very, very like you're adjusting one of the most core things that um, fundamentally like shifts your strategy if you go through a repositioning exercise, because you're allocating as much of your messaging and branding towards moving either I'm speaking to a new customer segment when it comes to a perfect fit, or I'm just providing a different service to a customer segment that I already know. And so Austin, your kind of your insight there is sometimes there's a moment where we start to see that we have so much experimental, or even we're increasing in our new markets, that maybe we need to actually shift that curve a little bit. And in doing so, sometimes our ideal clients end up moving more into distraction clients at that point as business begins to roll out. It could be that a new market actually moves an ideal client completely off to a distraction, or to to now being either experimental, or maybe it's a closure of service, or it's a closure of a market. So there's so many things that can come out of this to help tune and think through your position. So honing questions. So how would you hone this graph, right? Why do we continue to work with distraction customers? That's a question that I think is important to ask. Like, why do you continue to work with them? Is it an ideal to continue to work with them? What makes our perfect fit customers perfect, right? Why do we love the customers? That's something that I've been personally going through, is trying to identify what makes the customers that I really like working for really great in order to help me hone that curve the way I want it to. What's the end goal of our experiment, right? If you're in this experimental process, what's the end goal? And then lastly, how will we be uniquely competitive in a new market? Because if you're going to be going in a new market, you better be thinking about, how do I actually be the unique person in that market? Because new markets take a lot of resource to break into. So before we jump into questions, I do want to just go through 4 real quick curves that are just very common. This first curve is what I call is the undefined position. So oftentimes you will see this type of position as or when you look at your customer segments and over a 12-month period, this is a, hey there, this is a position that I would say is still trying to understand what they do. And because they aren't sure of what they do, they don't necessarily understand exactly who they do it for, right? So this position I would say is undefined. Now, is that a bad position? Early on, no. Or possibly as you're starting to figure out, maybe you had a position that just, I mean, a service that just really broke down and didn't work. You've got to go back to the drawing board. Living in this position really does, I would say, if this is where you find yourself, repositioning will be the best thing for you. Because by pulling on a lot of different levers, not just customer attraction, you'll be able to move this position to a different curve. This is another one, is we don't know who they are curve. It's the curve of we feel like we've got some services that we're giving to some people, but we just keep experimenting trying to find it, and we're going into new markets, but we've never really had that perfect fit moment where I feel like I know what I'm doing. This curve is an interesting curve because it really does communicate customer profiles are going to be really important for you to develop, to start to really mine for what makes a really good project or product that you're working on with a client, and really to hone in that experimental section of what things are the best revenue for you right now, or maybe that you're most passionate about. Let's really design a profile for that, target more of those people, and move that over to perfect fit, and maybe consider letting go some of those clients that are more distractions. The third one is a tuning for growth position. In other words, you guys are at this point that you're like, we've got to grow, we've got to expand, and because of that, we're going to actually take on less ideal clients and start experimenting. This is that really not risk adverse type of business. It's the business that is really trying to continue to push forward. But one thing I would say is, if I saw a curve that looked like this, I'd say, how long have you been operating like that? Because I would have questions, one, around, are there other competitors in the market space that are causing you to be like this? Or are you having issues internally? Are you burning your team out? Would be one question I would see in this, because you're constantly creating new services and processes in order to service new places. I also would wonder in this particular position is how many of these experimental clients, if we really got down to it, are actually more just distractions. Because you're just unsure of the service that you're actually providing, or you're just trying to get whoever walks in the door to make a sale. Lastly is calculated growth. So this is where most businesses end up kind of finding their rhythm in life. And that is, they're in a position where they found a perfect fit. It's about slow growth. And there's going to be moments of experiment. There's going to be moments of distraction. And distraction ultimately becomes attrition of our clients as we scale and grow. To me, when I think about most businesses that are in their practice of sustainability, this is the position that we tune and hone for, where maybe you might be thinking about breaking into new markets or offering new services. We would then take your brand position and think about, how do we reimagine this messaging to move it more closer towards, in all of your branding, more closer towards an experimental market, and explore a couple new markets. So that's how you would use this tool internally to start thinking about how you communicate to different customers and hone your brand position. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I know we have about 10 minutes left, and would love, if there is some questions that you might have, I'd love to answer them as brief as I can. I'm not the only expert in the room. So if someone has an answer as well, I'd love for you to share that.
I have a question on, I don't even know if it's a question, but more like a thought between a distraction and experiment. Like determining a distraction client sounds like someone you've had maybe for a job or two, a month or 6 or 2 years or whatever. Whereas experimental, you're kind of walking into the potential for distraction clients, right? Maybe you hired somebody that has a skill set. Is that what you're saying? You're like, hey, let's try this out. Let's see if maybe we can utilize this. But I wonder what your take on, like, what happens if they become distractions, like auditing your experiments to become success stories, or which column do they end up moving into, and figuring that part out?
It's a good question. When it comes to distractions, when clients that I would classify as distractions, they would be clients that you are offering a core service that you feel like you offer, but the client is no longer ideal, because whether it could be because they just don't have the income to pay at your rates anymore. It could be that they're in a different season of business now, and and because of that, it causes you to maybe bend your service a little bit to service what they do. But it's not, the reason why you're bending the service isn't because you're trying to provide new service. It's because you're actually trying to make it fit to a client that no longer is ideal. Whereas an experimental market it's an ideal client, but maybe they're asking you to do a service that you as a business owner say, I think that there could be value in revenue and demand that I can capture here. And because of that, I'm actually going to think through a new service. And in the whole time, I'm experimenting, thinking through, I wonder if this could be a new offering. And because of that, we can actually expand our client, our client profiles, not necessarily in their demographics, or maybe even their needs, but maybe possibly the way that we can solve another problem they might have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I have one kind of around a shift. Say you're in an ideal spot with the opposition or with the perfect fit and the experimental, and you've got still some of those distractions hanging around. Do you think it's beneficial to try to move those distractions into the perfect fit, whether that's budgetary concerns or relationship type things? Do you think it's worth the effort to try to bring those people into the ideal scenario, or is it kind of a cut bait and move along because you've got these experimentals in the new markets potentially, and those are kind of you're working on those, and you already know that there's maybe some sort of barrier or something with these distractions?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question because I think it's one of those things like I come from, I was born in '85 and I'm a child of the '90s, early aughts, and DTR was a thing of our past of determining the relationship, and I think oftentimes in distraction clients, DTRs are really important to happen more frequently. In other words, to really ask those clients about and to be really straightforward with those clients about how your business is progressing. So I think a distracted client actually can become to move back into an ideal client because you can convince them of the opportunities that you see in their business to move them into that. A lot of times distracted clients aren't distractions because of budget or scope. It could just because of time. They don't have time to really invest into a project. And on top of that, they just don't necessarily see the value yet. So some of this is so you can convert a distracted client and move them over, but you don't do that at forsaking it by changing your service to bend to their need. The truth is most of the time they're distractions for a reason, and they're distractions because they just don't fit your business model anymore. However, what I know is every business grows, their business is growing too, and there could be opportunity for you to intersect with them. But you have to calculate that time and trade off.
Yep, makes sense.
Any more questions someone might have? I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher, so I have good wait time. So I understand there's internal processors like Mr. Greg here.
No, that's good. I just was going to ask, what's kind of, and you may get to this, I don't know if there's a section after this, but trying to think about what would be an action step, like if you make a determination around like a shift in brand positioning or clarifying that, what would be something like a takeaway that you would advise?
Yeah. So actually I do have some next steps. And whether it be a partnership with me or a partnership with another agency, these are the things that I would tell people to do. This is about roughly what it costs for us to do these types of things. Each project is different, but it could be that you might find yourself in a moment that you're looking to grow. And we offer like a brand leadership retainer. So for 6 months, for 3 months, every quarter we provide brand leadership, and then we negotiate a budget where we can actually leverage and move your brand to the next direction. So if you're repositioning, you might need graphics work. You might need someone to help build a whole brand new identity, because repositioning, like, that's one way to reposition quickly, is to shift and change your identity to appeal to a new market. We also offer repositioning workshops. So this is for you, it would be around spending about 2 hours with us going through a deep dive of your current positioning. And then we come out on the other end with a positioning guide that we build to refocus your positioning, whether it be simplified positioning is one deliverable out of that. And then it's also looking at services as well, of how do you reframe your services in a way that really connect to your target audience. Another thing that might be true is that if you're in this position where most of your clients are distractions, maybe you need to redefine your customer profile. So building new profiles, doing some market research on which ones worked well, and how do you build target audiences from those, particularly for marketing and content strategy, messaging strategy. So maybe you want to communicate in a new way with a new market or an experimental market. I was talking to a client this morning of like, what if you created a landing page that had to do with an affinity group? What does it look like to message to them as an experiment to really connect them to your services and to demonstrate that value? And lastly, is just building marketing strategy, right? Like, if you needed to reposition, or you needed to think through how do we communicate our services or to our audience differently, just revamping your marketing strategy. So those are the things that I would tell you to do, is to move forward in that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's helpful to know just some of the services or things. Yeah, and kind of how those might flesh themselves out.
Mm-hmm. I would say that positioning is one of those things that, I know you might say that, of course you say that, but having an outside person come in is really helpful, mainly just because you are so in your business day in and day out that sometimes it's good to have fresh eyes to just come in and evaluate. But yeah, that's what we do. Any other questions? Well, right on. Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming. This is my first webinar, so I would love any of the feedback that you would be willing to give me. You can just hit me up on LinkedIn. I also am going to go ahead and post a link to all the slides in here, so you can go ahead and access that. I just realized I put the wrong link in there. Hang on a second. But I will do that real quick. Share. Here you go. Here is the actual link to all the slides. I will leave this open for the next 5-6 minutes so that you guys can grab those links, because after the links are gone, after the chat closes, you won't be able to get back to it. So you can grab those links. I'll leave it open. After that, I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'm going to go ahead and close off the recording here. And, yep, talk to you guys soon.